The barrel of the old rifle trembled, but not from the chill of the encroaching dusk. Ilara held it steady, its pitted iron sight fixed on the man's chest. The fire crackled between them, a small pocket of defiant warmth in the vast, indifferent plains, spitting sparks that died in the gloom. His face, shadowed by the brim of a worn hat, was calm, his eyes missing the fear she'd expected. They were just watchful, like the hawk she'd seen circling that afternoon. "Everything you have," she said, her voice a raw whisper, scraped thin by thirst and desperation. "The food. The horse." Now he didn't move, save for a slow blink. He looked past her, his gaze shifting to the dense clutch of sagebrush behind her, where she knew two small sets of eyes were watching, wide with a terror that mirrored the frantic pounding in her own chest. He looked back at her, and a flicker of understanding, not pity, crossed his features. "The food you can have," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to come more from the earth than from him. He gestured with his chin toward a canvas sack near the fire. "There's jerky, some hardtack, an apple." It's not much. His gaze was unnervingly direct. "The horse, we'll need him." The use of the word "we're" was a stone dropped into the silent pool of her fear. It was a presumption so audacious it momentarily disarmed her. Before she could recalibrate her anger, he spoke again, his tone even. "My name's Caleb. I'm heading north. To my claim near the Cartonwood River. It's another week's ride." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "There's a cabin. A well. Shelter for the winter. It's more than you'll find out here." He saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the war between pride and the gnawing reality of her children's hunger. "I can't carry you and your family, but the wagon can." Ilara's mind raced, a frantic scramble of calculations and distrust. His offer was an anomaly in a world that had taught her kindness was a myth, a lure for a trap. Men offered help, and that help always came with a price she was no longer willing to pay. For a week, she and the children had been moving ghosts, subsisting on what little they could forage, their destination a vague, hopeless notion of Zaway. Her husband's face, pale and still, was a constant spectre at the edge of her vision. The memory of their burnt-out homestead was a taste of ash in her mouth. This man, Caleb, was an unknown variable. He was large, capable, and yet he sat by his fire, making no move for the pistol holstered at his hip. He was either a fool or something far more dangerous. She lowered the rifle a fraction, the weight of it suddenly immense. "Why?" she asked, the single word brittle. Caleb picked up a stick and pushed a log deeper into the flames, the gesture unhurried, thoughtful. "Because I've seen what a winter out here does to people who are prepared," he answered, not looking at her. "And I see two little ones hiding in the brush who aren't." He finally raised his eyes to meet hers again. "And because my father taught me you don't leave folks to starve if you've got a piece of bread to share." He stood up slowly, his hands kept carefully away from his body. "The offer is simple. You ride in the wagon. You help with the chores. When we get to my place, you and your children will have a roof over your heads and food in your bellies. No more than that. No less." He walked to the canvas sack and untied it, placing it on the ground between them. "It's your choice." That night, she accepted, though the word itself never passed her lips. She simply heard a silent Leo and a whimpering Maya from the bushes and let them eat the jerky he offered, their small hands shaking. She took the first watch, the rifle laid across her lap, her back pressed against a cold rock. She watched him sleep, or pretend to, his breathing deep and even, a picture of trust she could not comprehend, let alone reciprocate. The man was a puzzle, and she was too tired to solve it. For now, survival was enough. The journey began under a pale, washed-out sky. The wagon, a sturdy, broad-wheeled vessel, groaned under the weight of Caleb's sparse but essential belongings, sacks of flour and beans, tools, a plowshare wrapped in burlap, and 2 barrels of water. Ilara and the children sat in the back, nestled amongst the supplies, a small island of mistrust in Caleb's solitary world. The silence between the two adults was a landscape of its own, as vast and empty as the plains stretching out before them. They communicated in the clipped, pragmatic language of necessity. "Water?" he'd ask, passing a canteen back without turning his head. "Your turn," she'd say, her voice flat, as she moved to take the reins while he walked alongside to spare the horses. Leo and Maya were ghosts, their voices seemingly lost back at the ruin of their home. They huddled together, their gazes fixed on the rhythmic sway of the canvas wagon cover, rarely looking at the man whose charity was their lifeline. Ilara watched him constantly. She noted the quiet competence in his hands as he repaired a fraying piece of harness, the gentle way he spoke to the horses, murmuring reassurances as they navigated a rocky patch of ground. He never pushed her for conversation, never asked about the haunted look in her eyes or the raw, rope-like scars on her wrists she kept hidden beneath her sleeves. He simply existed, a steady, predictable presence, as reliable as the sunrise. He moved with a purpose that felt ancient, a rhythm of work and rest dictated by the sun and the needs of the animals. His patience was a form of pressure, slowly wearing away at the sharp edges of her fear. She had built her walls high and thick, but he wasn't trying to tear them down. He was just waiting, tending his fire, giving her the space to find the door on her own. One afternoon, he glanced back and saw Leo tracing patterns in the dust on a sack of flour. Without a word, Caleb stopped the wagon, walked to the side of the trail, and returned with a piece of soft, pale wood and his whittling knife. He handed them to the boy, who looked first to his mother for permission. Ilara gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod. For the rest of the day, Leo was absorbed, the scrape of the knife on wood a tiny, hopeful sound in the vast quiet. The sky had been a deceptive, brilliant blue all morning, but by midday, a line of bruised purple clouds appeared on the western horizon, advancing with unnatural speed. Caleb sniffed the air. "Storm's coming," he said, his voice devoid of alarm, merely stating a fact. "A bad one. We need to find shelter," he urged the horses into a faster trot, his eyes scanning the flat, exposed terrain. The wind picked up, whipping Ilara's hair across her face and carrying the scent of rain and damp earth. Within the hour, the world had turned to a churning grey chaos. Rain fell not in drops but in solid, wind-driven sheets, turning the ground to a slick, treacherous mud. The temperature plummeted. Caleb pulled the wagon into the slight protection of a rocky outcrop, a shallow overhang that offered meager defense against the deluge. "This will have to do," he shouted over the roar of the wind. Working with an efficiency that was mesmerizing, he unhitched the terrified horses, leading them into the most sheltered part of the recess and calming them with a low, steady voice. He threw a heavy oilcloth over the wagon's contents, then pulled another from his gear. "Get the children under here," he instructed Ilara, his words nearly snatched away by the gale. She bundled Leo and Maya, who were shivering violently, under the stiff, cold cloth, creating a small, dark tent against the rock face. Caleb, soaked to the bone, managed to start a small, sputtering fire in a hollow of the rock, shielding it with his own body until the flames caught. He disappeared for a moment and returned with the last of his good jerky, handing it to her. "For them," he said, nodding toward the lump of canvas. She watched as he settled himself a few feet away, his back to the wind, his hat pulled low. He was giving them what little comfort there was, the fire, the shelter, the last of the best food. He asked for nothing. In the cold, wet dark, huddled with her children, Ilara felt the first crack in her armor. It wasn't gratitude, not yet. It was a profound and unsettling sense of confusion. He was protecting them. He was providing for them. Just as a husband, a father, would do. The thought was a painful shard of glass in her heart. The storm broke as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening under a sliver of moon. The air was cold and sharp. In the pre-dawn light, they worked together, wordlessly, to pull a fallen cottonwood branch from the muddy track. Ilara was surprised by her own strength, by the simple satisfaction of the shared labor. The crisis had subtly redrawn the lines between them. The silence was no longer a wall, but a shared space. As they hitched the horses, he spoke, his voice still low but less guarded. "Caleb Thorne," he said, looking at the horizon, not at her. "That's my full name," he paused. "Figured you should know who you're traveling with." She absorbed the information, turning it over in her mind. A name. A history. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. "Ilara," she replied, her voice quiet. He glanced at her, a hint of a smile touching the corners of his mouth. It was the first time she had seen it, and it changed his face, softening the harsh lines carved by sun and solitude. "Just Ilara?" A woman of mystery. The comment was light, a piece of driftwood on the serious current of their journey, and she didn't know what to do with it, so she said nothing, turning her attention to securing a loose rope on the wagon. He didn't press. They moved on, the squeak of the wagon wheels loud in the clean air. Later that day, Maya, lulled by the motion, began to hum a tune, a fragmented little melody Ilara hadn't heard since before the fire. Leo looked up from his whittling, a half-finished bird taking shape in his small hands, and he smiled at his sister. Ilara felt a tightness in her throat. It was the sound of her children returning to themselves, a sound she thought she might never hear again. She looked at Caleb's broad back as he drove, at the steady line of his shoulders. He had given them this. This moment of peace, this fragile, budding hope. She didn't have a last name to offer him in return. She wasn't sure she even owned her first one anymore. She was just a survivor, a collection of sharp edges and painful memories. 2 days later, they crested a low rise, and Caleb pulled the wagon to a halt. "There it is," he said. Below them, nestled in a gentle curve of the land, was a small valley. A creek, lined with cottonwoods just beginning to show the gold of autumn, snaked through it. In the center stood a log cabin and a barn whose roof listed to one side like a tired old man. The fields around them were choked with weeds and brush, a testament to years of neglect. A broken fence leaned precariously, marking a boundary that nature had long since reclaimed. This was his dream. To Ilara, it looked like a ruin, another place of hard work and potential heartbreak. Her spirit sank. It was one thing to follow a man through the wilderness, it was another to chain her future, and her children's, to a place so clearly broken. Caleb must have seen the disappointment on her face. He dismounted and walked to stand beside her, his gaze not on her, but on the valley. "It's not much now," he admitted, his voice quiet. "My grandfather built the cabin. He and my father worked this land. I was born in that room there," he pointed. "It's been empty a long time. But the bones are good. The well water is sweet, and the soil is rich under all those weeds." He finally turned to look at her, his eyes earnest. "It's safe. No one will find you here." He led them down the gentle slope. The cabin was larger up close than it had appeared from the hill. Inside, it smelled of dust, dry wood, and mice. A thick layer of grime covered everything. But it was solid, the logs thick and true. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall. Most importantly, there was a second, smaller room off the main one. "You and the children can take this room," he said, pushing the crude wooden door open. "It'll give you some privacy." The promise of a door she could close, a space that was hers alone, was the most profound gift he could have offered. It was more than shelter, it was a recognition of her dignity. Standing in the dusty, empty room, Ilara felt a sliver of something she hadn't dared to feel in a very long time, a future. The days that followed fell into a steady, comforting rhythm of labor. They were a team, united against the encroaching winter and the slow decay of the homestead. Caleb was a tireless worker, and Ilara found a surprising solace in matching his pace. They started with the cabin, chinking the gaps between the logs with a mixture of mud and dried grass. Ilara, her hands raw, worked alongside him, her movements becoming more fluid and confident with each passing day. She learned the heft of an axe, the satisfaction of a well-mended seam. While they worked, Leo and Maya explored their new world. They chased grasshoppers in the tall grass, their laughter echoing in the quiet valley. Caleb, in his patient way, began to teach them. He showed Leo how to identify animal tracks and how to fashion a fishing hook from a thorn. He taught Maya the names of the wildflowers that grew by the creek. He was building more than a home, he was rebuilding a childhood for them. One afternoon, while they were repairing the barn roof, Caleb showed Ilara how to drive a nail straight and true. Their hands brushed, and for a moment, a current passed between them, warm and unexpected. She pulled her hand back quickly, her heart stuttering. He didn't acknowledge it, his focus remaining on the task, but the air had changed. The physical space between them, once a chasm of distrust, was now filled with a quiet awareness. They were two solitary people learning to orbit each other, their paths slowly, inevitably, converging. She started to see the man beneath the quiet capability. She saw the sadness that sometimes flickered in his eyes when he looked at the overgrown fields, a hint of a loss he never spoke of. She saw the genuine pleasure he took in Leo's clumsy attempts to use a hammer, the gentle way he praised Maya's drawings scratched in the dirt. He was a good man. The simple, undeniable truth of it settled deep inside her, a seed taking root in barren ground. One evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on the newly repaired porch steps, watching the stars prick the vast, dark canvas of the sky. The silence was no longer heavy or awkward, it was a comfortable blanket they shared. Caleb was oiling a piece of leather for a harness, his hands moving with practiced grace. Ilara was mending a tear in Leo's shirt, the small, repetitive motion of the needle soothing. The homestead was quiet, save for the chirp of crickets and the whisper of wind in the cottonwoods. The cabin behind them was warm and secure, a fortress they had built with their own 4 hands. He finally broke the quiet, his voice soft. "What happened, Ilara?" He didn't look at her, giving her the freedom to refuse the question. She stopped sewing, her needle poised in midair. She hadn't spoken of it to anyone. The words were stones in her throat. But here, in the gentle darkness, beside this steady man, the stones began to feel lighter. "Raiders," she said, her voice barely audible. "They came at dawn. They wanted everything. My husband, he tried to fight them," she didn't need to say the rest. The silence held the violence, the fire, the fear. "I took the children and ran. I just kept running," she resumed her sewing, her stitches suddenly fierce and tight. He stopped his work. He didn't offer empty platitudes or condolences. He simply listened, his presence a solid anchor in the turbulent memory. After a long moment, he said, "You're safe here, Ilara." It wasn't a promise for the future, but a statement of fact, as solid and real as the stone foundation beneath their feet. He had said it before, but this time, she heard it differently. It wasn't just about safety from raiders or winter. It was safety from the world that had broken her. It was a promise of peace. She looked at him then, really looked at him in the starlight, and saw the deep well of kindness in his eyes. He wasn't trying to fix her. He was giving her the time and space to heal herself. Winter arrived, blanketing the valley in a soft, silent layer of white. The world shrank to the cabin, the barn, and the path between them. Inside, the fire in the great stone hearth was the heart of their home, casting a warm, flickering glow on the log walls. They had done it. They had beaten the season. The larder was full, the cabin was snug, and the animals were safe. The place no longer felt like Caleb's homestead, it felt like theirs. The fear that had been Ilara's constant companion for so long had finally receded, replaced by a quiet contentment she had never expected to feel again. One night, a fierce wind rattled the shutters, and Maya cried out in her sleep, caught in a nightmare. Ilara was by her side instantly, murmuring soothing words, stroking her hair. The door to their room creaked open, and Caleb stood there, silhouetted by the firelight from the main room. He held a tin cup. "Warm milk," he whispered, his voice a low rumble. "With a little honey. My mother used to give it to me." He passed her the cup, his fingers brushing hers. He waited in the doorway, a silent, reassuring sentinel, until Maya's breathing had deepened into a peaceful sleep. As he turned to go, Ilara reached out, her fingers closing around his forearm. "Thank you, Caleb." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had done for them, of every silent act of kindness. It was the first time she had willingly touched him. He stopped, his arm tense under her hand. He didn't turn around, but she could feel the shift in his stillness. He gave a single, short nod. He gently pulled his arm free and walked back into the main room, leaving her in the quiet darkness. She stood there for a long time, the warmth from his arm still lingering on her fingertips. In that moment, she understood with absolute clarity that she was not a guest or a charity case. She was not a prisoner of her past or a dependent on his goodwill. She was his partner. She was home. Spring came to the valley like a long, slow exhale. The snow melted, feeding the creek until it ran full and boisterous. The cottonwoods budded, and the fields, cleared and tilled by their shared labor, were a rich, dark brown, ready for planting. Leo and Maya, their cheeks rosy with health, were a constant, joyful presence, their voices mixing with the songs of returning birds. One bright afternoon, Ilara stood on the porch, shelling beans into a wooden bowl, and watched Caleb in the near field. He was teaching Leo how to set a fence post, his large frame bent over the boy's smaller one, his movements patient and deliberate. Leo, full of serious concentration, mimicked his every action. They looked like a father and a son. The sight didn't bring a pang of loss, but a swell of profound, peaceful gratitude. This was her life now. This quiet, beautiful life, built from the ashes of another. Later, as the sun dipped below the western ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Caleb found her by the creek. He stood beside her, watching the water ripple over smooth stones. He held out his hand. Lying on his calloused palm were 2 rings, carved from the pale wood of a willow branch, their surfaces sanded smooth. He wasn't one for speeches. He didn't kneel. He simply looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "It's a good place to raise a family," he said, his voice quiet but sure. "A good name to share." Thorn he held one of the rings out to her. She looked from the ring to his face, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across her lips. She remembered the desperate, half-wild woman with a rifle, ready to trade a man's life for a piece of jerky. He had seen past the rifle, past the fear, and had seen her. He had offered her a wagon ride and had given her a world. She held out her hand. As he gently slipped the willow ring onto her finger, he leaned in, a smile in his voice as he whispered the words that had hung between them since the beginning. "You forgot my last name." Tears of joy welled in her eyes, blurring the image of his beloved face. "No," she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion as she lifted her other hand to cup his jaw. "I remember it now."